Hello and welcome to Planet Smasher HQ. I've written another Chess 28 game. I didn't mean to. Stick around and I'll tell you what happened. Hello. A few weeks ago, a lovely man called Ulrich sent me a lovely email. It was very complimentary about the stuff I was doing and the videos I was putting out, and I was so pleased with it. I printed it out and showed it to my children to say, look, people like what I'm doing, isn't it nice? So thanks, Ulrich. At the bottom of that email, he wrote these paragraphs. I have a question about future games. Now that we can use our fantasy miniatures, spaceship miniatures and even toy cars thanks to your rule sets, do you plan in a near or far future to allow us to use our fantasy football minis in one of your rule sets? Blood Bowl was always for me the hardest contrast between a game that should be fun and fast and in reality is slow, clunky and heavy for nothing. A Blood Bowl kind of a game, not especially football though, just sport, with the mindset of Hobgoblin would be amazing. I think it fits the vibe. Ulrich. I sent him an email back recommending Blitz Bowl, which is by Jamie Hewitt, and I think that's a fantastic design, and honestly I probably won't play Blood Bowl again now that I have Blitz Bowl. Blitz Bowl is smaller with smaller teams, and it has this really nice sort of ephemeral objective card system where you're all sort of racing to get points from scoring particular kinds of special plays, and when you score one of them you get a special ability. Anyway, I recommended Ulrich check out Blitz Bowl, and he said that in fact he had since sending that last email and thought it was really good. So I thought that was the end of that, and I cracked on with some other projects that were needing my time. So last week I was merrily working on a game design that I will probably talk about in an upcoming video, and I had just got to the point where I was having a meeting with someone about this game idea when that morning another email arrived from Ulrich. It contained this image, and I agreed to take the bait. So that morning I grabbed my chessboard and some Blood Bowl miniatures and started to imagine. I thought to myself, I'm pretty sure I can write this game in less than a day. And the reason I thought that is I already have the Chess 28 system that I made for Flagstone. So I thought, well, I'll start with the Chess 28 system and I'll see if I can drift that system into something that makes a fantasy football game or fantasy sports game feel fun. So the next stage was to try and come up with some initial design goals or design parameters. I started to quickly sketch out some potential names: Bloodsack, Ballsackers, Pitch Black, Bucket Ball, Loot Ball. And then I started sketching out what I thought the important elements would be. So engagement zones, some kind of marked mechanic feels important, an interesting goal mechanic, potentially replacing death with knockdown, having some kind of terrain, maybe moving, but I immediately sort of backed out of that idea. Passing the ball around, obviously. So then I started thinking about the ways that scoring should work. And one thing that I quite like in games is to focus the pressure and give people a reason to have conflict. And so I immediately started thinking, well, what if there was a single goal in the middle rather than a goal at each end? Because that would mean everyone is sort of focused on the centre. And so I started to think, well, maybe there's a central goal, and are there multiple ways to score? Because there are in like real sports, there's quite often different ways of getting like a goal and then a conversion kick or something. And at this point, I started to go and look at the internet and I started reading. I don't know basketball very well, I thought to myself, so why don't I go read the rules of basketball and see if that's inspirational. So I went and read the rules of basketball, the earliest ones and the modern ones, and that gave me a few ideas that sort of got weaved in, and then some of them got taken out again. So I started with this idea of a goal, and the next thing I did after that was to try and build a goal. So I grabbed some stuff. I've got these paint funnels, and somewhere in here got some tubes. Yeah, so there we go. So that's the beginning of a goal that we can put in the middle. Bit of super glue and a splat of paint later, and we have a central goal. But it looks like a bucket to me, so I'm going to call that a bucket. Next thing we need is some players. So I grabbed some players. As I said, I like Blitzbowl, and so I have a number of 6-man teams painted. So that's what I started with. Now I've got to know what these players do, so I printed out some blank unit cards from the Chess 28 system, and I started to fill them in with some positions. I figured that in this game you were trying to shoot the ball up into the bucket, and you had to do it from your opponent's side, so you couldn't score from your side. That would force players to have to move and punch over to the other side with the ball, which adds some risk. And then I thought, well, maybe you score smaller amounts of points if you're close to the bucket and more points if you're further away. So there's an advantage to going further into the opposing half, but you can take a little snapshot and take a cheeky smaller number of points if the opportunity arises. So that gave me the basic tension in this sport. And so I thought, well, we've probably got people who are trying to punch forward. We'll call them forwards. We've got people who are trying to shoot on goal. They'll be the shooters. And then we've got people who are kind of marking players and trying to block shots on goal. So we'll call them guards. So I created some ratkin forwards, shooters and guards, and some human forwards, shooters and guards. Adding their little movement options where they can do melee attacks, which I renamed Mark. And then I started messing about with whether or not there would be a health system or something different, because I was probably not going to have like elimination of models in this particular game. So then it was a case of coming up with some rules for picking up the ball and throwing the ball and shooting on goal, and that felt like there's a stat here called fight. If I change that to a more general skill thing, then I can use the simple D6 mechanic from the Chess 28 system, but I can use it for all kinds of different things, like picking up the ball and catching the ball and so on, as well as tackling. So having got this figured out, I drew a little diagram, and I thought that it would be interesting, now that I know that there are different scoring areas depending on how deep you are, that it might be interesting to eliminate some of those higher scoring squares that are closer and easier to get to. So that gave me some excuse to put some terrain down. So a couple of bits of blocking terrain changes the shape of the pitch. It blocks off these pairs of squares here, and it means that on this half, this team can score 1, 2, 3 points, 1, 2 or 3 points, but they can't score 4 points unless they're further back. So that just created a bit more reward for scoring the 4 points, because you can't just step over the line. At this point, I was thinking about how to create some dynamicness and make sure that the ball was moving around a lot, and that because I think I started at this point to play the game and explore what it would feel like and just click through it. And I got to a point quite early on in the game where a player had the ball. I immediately started to create a cage to protect them so that they could slowly move deeper into this half and get a shot off only when they were sort of protected and busted through here. And I immediately thought, that's not the feeling I want for this game. I took a inspiration from the shot clock rule in basketball and thought, okay, maybe you can only have the ball for a couple of turns. And so I added a mechanic where when you pick up the ball, you start getting tick tokens, and those tick tokens, you can only have 3 of them, or it causes a turnover. So you have to get rid of the ball, and that sort of extrinsically motivates getting rid of the ball and making shots quickly. There was a few other pieces that I still need to figure out. One was combat. How does tackling work? Chess 28 is a simple dice pool system where it basically uses a number of dice equal to the stat that you've got. So if you've got a fight of 3, then you roll 3 dice. And it's like Gaslands. A 4 and a 5 is a success, and a 6 is 2 successes. And when you're defending, you need a 5 or a 6 for success, and the 6s are just 1. So this first version of the game had the idea that we weren't going to kill anyone, so we didn't have a wound stat. Perhaps instead we had a grit stat. And maybe if this guy's got a grit value of 2, then you have to do 2 hits to knock him down. Otherwise he's just knocked back if you do 1, you knock him back. If you do 2, you knock him over. And then I started thinking, well, actually, if you do 0, maybe there should be some kind of switcheroo situation where something bad happens to the tackler. Based on the rules, the chess 28 rules, I already had rules for supporting the attacker and the defender, which requires you to be inside their marking areas, which meant I could create models that have really flexible marking situations with they mark all the squares around them, or models that just have one square in front of them that are not very good at defense, okay if they pick their attacks, but not very good at general defense. So that felt good. And now that I had people being able to be tackled and knocked down, I wondered, is this knockdown an important control mechanic? So I added the rule where if you knock someone down, they go face down, and then they have to spend an action to flip over the first turn, and then the next turn they can spend an action to stand up. Spoilers, that ended up being a really bad rule that I removed. So there was only a couple of other things that I needed to figure out. One is that the game was feeling too static. So in Flagstone, there's a kind of chess-like feeling in that you only move a couple of models each and then play passes almost immediately. But because of this sports situation, it was feeling really restrictive. I wanted to be able to run and pick up the ball and pass and then be able to move and do kind of combined plays so that the game felt fluid. So I changed the activation system from the core chess 28 system, which is basically you get 3 AP and everyone can take 1 action, bumping that up to 5 AP, which turned out just to be like a confusingly large number, and I would kept forgetting how many I'd spent. So I just thought, well, at that point, I've got 5 AP and 6 models. Let's just have an I go, you go system. So I flipped it to I go, you go. Everybody gets an activation. Everybody gets an activation. The last piece of the puzzle was how the end of the round or the end of the game works. And I tried where if you took a shot on goal and it landed in, you would score the points, and then the ball would bounce back out of the goal and you could keep on playing. That ended up being a little bit too unpredictable. So instead I had it that as soon as you score a goal, the game is over, and a match is a number of games, and you have to basically score the most points after a number of games, and that's the match. A bit like tennis. So by now I had everything that I needed, and I spent the afternoon writing up the rules. Some of this stuff is just repeated from the core rules of Chess 28, but actually I changed a fair amount of stuff. I took little snapshots of the doodles that I'd done from my notebook, and yeah, there's a whole, 16-page rule book here that has all of the basic rules in. So I sent that to Ulrich. He had sent me this image the night before. I had woken up and seen it at about 9, sent him an email at about 9 a.m. UK time saying, all right, I'll take the bait. And by about 8 p.m. that night, I sent him this first version of the alpha rulebook. So there is electronic proof that this was one day's work. Obviously, Ulrich was surprised and delighted to receive Crudbucket after only one day. And he agreed to go off and playtest it with his partner, which he did. Several days later, I received another email from Ulrich. It had detailed notes on their first playtesting sessions. They had played the game a few times and had sort of enjoyed it, but there were some big problems that he pointed out. In particular, the game was taking too long, and there was way too much like models falling over and getting in the way of everyone. It felt very crowded and a bit of a melee scrum rather than what I was really hoping for, which was a game of dynamically moving and passing and making risky shots on goal. So particularly this observation here, it feels like most of the game has more melee than Blitz Bowl or Blood Bowl, and misses the throw and shoot game. That was a big red sign that I hadn't nailed it in the first iteration of the design. And here games felt really long. We had to stop a match after an hour and a half because neither of us had scored a shoot yet. So that, again, massive red flag. So this was fantastic because it gave me an immediate sense of what was wrong with the game. I had played the game a few times by myself. I hadn't showed it to anyone else yet. And this is one of the things that is so common with the design, that you can, even with the miniatures on the table, you can put a design together, click through it, and have it feel just fine. It's theoretically on paper going to hang together. And I had shared this first version with Glenn, who'd given it a brief read through, and he pointed at the knockdown mechanic as looking like it was going to be pretty tedious, which he was bang on with. And I'd been thinking about that over the weekend before Ulrich's second email arrived. Anyway, so what I did was I cleared the deck, and I took a couple of key notes from this email from Ulrich. One was that tick tokens, this idea that there was a shot clock and you had to remember to put tokens on to remember how long a model had had the ball. That was just a really clumsy implementation of what should have been an emergent property of the game, which is I want the player to pass the ball very fast after receiving it. So let me find a way to emergently encourage that behavior rather than punishing it if you don't. And this is kind of like a classic game design thing. It's like I can start with a clumsy implementation, which is I want you to do a thing, so I tell you have to do a thing, and then move to a more subtle implementation, which is I would like you to do a thing, so I'm going to provide you with kind of tactical emergent benefits for doing that thing. So tick tokens had to go. And the second was this suggestion that 2x6 players feels really crowded on such a small pitch. Maybe having fewer players, maybe 4 players aside, could really help both with the crowdedness and the feeling of the game, but also with this problem they were having where when you try and do something like pick up the ball, you get negatives on your dice, or rather the difficulty of that increases with the number of players that are marking you. And if there were fewer players on the pitch, there would be fewer marking penalties, and all of the skill tests would sort of get easier. Okay, so I cleared the board. There's lots of things I like. I think the board is the shape that it needs to be. I like the single bucket. All of that can stay. We're going to get rid of 2 players. The issues are there's not enough move, pass, shoot. It's not dynamic enough. There are too many tackle zones, and getting knocked down is boring and clogs the game up. So I had a couple of ideas. One is I've been messing around with this idea in a different game, which was the camera follows the action, or in this case, the camera follows the ball. And this gave me a really good idea for how to emergently inspire a dynamic game of passing and moving the ball around. So it's as simple as if the player gets the ball, they immediately activate. And that's even if they have already activated. So in an I go, you go system, it could be that I get a chance to activate all my models, but if a ball gets passed from one player to another, even if this player has already activated, they get another activation. And that allows them to ping pong the ball around the team in a really cool way to get lots of kind of knock-on activations. But the problem here is that I really wanted it to be a situation where I could pass the ball, move, and then pass the ball again, move, and then shoot or something. So in the first version of the game, you only really got to do one action each time you activated. That had to change. It's very standard to have 2 AP. So I changed it to a basic 2-action system where moving, passing, shooting, tackling, pivoting, they're all 1 action, 1 AP actions. And then I added an aimed shot, which allows you to spend a little longer shooting on goal, and picking up the ball is still a free thing that happens. Now we had a much more dynamic game where the ball could be passed from player to player, triggering them to get activations. And if a player drops the ball and it ends up being caught by a opposing player, now suddenly they get to activate, and that kind of causes a natural turnover mechanic where if in the middle of a turn somebody else grabs the ball, now they immediately get to activate, and now this coach is the active coach, and so that's cool. The next part was to figure out tackling, because something was very wrong with this boring knocking people over tackling mechanism. So the idea came to me that maybe tackles create much more pushback, and maybe they create more options so that I've got decisions about how I respond to a successful tackle. So I created a different system where you both roll your tackle dice, and if I end up with more successes than you, then I can spend those successes, and I can spend a couple of successes to strip the ball from you if you've got it. I can spend a success to push you back. I can spend a success to follow up into a vacated space. And so I can decide whether it's more important to strip the ball, or whether I want to push you and push forward myself. If I get 2 or 3 successes, I've got some options about how I want to spend them. So that's what I changed the system to, and it also created a much more natural switcheroo system where if the defender happens to roll more successes than the attacker, then essentially they're spending the successes and now I can knock back and push and so forth. So with these notes made and a few games by myself, I thought I had enough to iterate the game. So here is version 0.2 of Crudbucket, now with a lovely new logo from Ulrich. It makes a bunch of changes and I've still got a few bits and scraps that I want to write up. And I have created a slightly larger set of teams. I've got a set here of humans and Ratkin, and I changed the stats here to be skill, muscle and defense. And there are some orcs and some dwarfs here. And I created the points so that some teams are elite, like the dwarfs only get 3 models because it's 60 points is your team. Whereas these orcs will get 4, and these goblins will get 6, and these elves are also elite, so they'll only get 3. So there it is, a couple of days of development and iteration, and I now have a version 2 of Crudbucket, which I am excited to share with you. I hope this story of this game's inception and development over a couple of days is interesting to you. Thanks for watching. So there it is, Crudbucket. You can download Crudbucket in early access form right now by going to planetsmashergames.itch.com or click the link in the description below. The game will cost you $5 in its initial form, but if you are a Patreon supporter of mine, thank you. And also you can have the game for free by clicking the other link, the one that says Patreon access at the end. Also, if you are a Patreon supporter, you can have all my other early access games for free as well. If you do download Crudbucket and get it on the table, it's easy enough to do. You just need a chessboard and some fantasy football miniatures, or you can even use chess pieces, I suppose. Then let me know. I'm really interested in feedback and I will keep iterating the game as and when I get feedback and or inspiration. You can either comment on this video or head into my new Discord and we can chat about it there. All right, until next time, bye-bye.